Hi, I'm Rich Walter, Vice President for Curriculum and Outreach for the Center for Israel Education, and delighted to have you join us for our special series of materials related to Israel's upcoming Knesset election. I'm delighted today to be joined by Professor Michael Berger of Emory University, and today's topic is the influence of religion in the Israeli electoral system and political environment. Thanks for joining me, Michael. It's a pleasure to have you. First question is really about the emergence of the ultra-Orthodox parties and their history in the Israeli political system. Anything you can share in terms of that development since 1948 to today would be, I think, very helpful for our viewers.
The first thing to understand is how many of the parties that were active starting in 1948 were really heirs to prior movements before the state was established. So already in Europe, in the early 1900s, there were two primary religious movements, one being religious Zionist, the Mizrahi. They wanted to participate in the rebuilding of the country, of a national homeland, even though they were based in Eastern Europe, started in Lithuania, and a more rejectionist or anti-modern party called Agudat Yisrael, which was made up of the Lithuanian yeshiva community, which were rejectionists of modernity, and also Hasidic groups, which were more insular, based on a variety of mysticism and pietism. But the two groups kind of saw modernity as a challenge. One was more accommodationist, that was Mizrahi, and the Haredim, what came to be called the Haredim, which means the tremblers, they were the ones who were rejecting. So obviously, in terms of Zionism, one group was opposed to a secular state, the other one wanted to work with it. So when the state was established in 1948, you had primarily two religious parties, and Agudat Yisrael continued, and they would still be part of the government, to represent the interests of their population, but they were in the mode of rebuilding after the terrible decimation of the Holocaust.
And it was Agudat Yisrael that made the agreement with Berger in
Correct.
1947 that still influences Israeli religious
And that was
today.
That was very, very powerful, even though the religious Zionists were the ones who, in the end, benefited immensely from that arrangement, because it meant that all the municipal buildings and national buildings would have kosher food and keep Shabbat in the public square. It made it much easier for what we call the religious Zionists to participate in the army and in the larger society, but it was also the deferment and the protection of yeshiva students that the Haredim were particularly interested in preserving. And that was pretty much the status quo until the 1970s, when the first division, even rupture, was a group of religious Zionists after the 73 war, developed Gush Emunim, and became focused on territory and the not only the West Bank and Gaza and Golan, but just in general rejecting the idea of land for peace.
Right. These were the people like Moshe Levinger who favored Greater Israel and eventually formed the core of the settlement movement, correct?
Correct.
Great.
And then, on the other hand, the Agudat Yisrael, which were the interests of the Haredim, they also started to subdivide. In the 1980s, you had Rav Shach, who was the head of the most major Lithuanian yeshiva called Panovich. He was the fiery leader of that movement. He wanted to be part of the government to insist on the interests of their community, which was primarily money for their yeshiva system, as a separate yeshiva system to educate their youth, but also social services, welfare, that the welfare state would support their youth as they grew up and married and had more children, to support the high fertility. The biggest change for the sort of the ultra-Orthodox movements was 1984, Shas.
Yeah. I was just going to ask if there was any similar development pre-1948 in the Sephardi world as you just described happening in Europe.
First, there were the percentage of Sephardim, Jews of Itok Mizrach, countries of Arab populations or Muslim countries. Their major aliyah was really from 1944, and then through 1952, 53, and that was a massive wave, and they were the underclass that wasn't addressed by any political party until Likud came along, and Menachem Begin really rallied them. And then in 1984, Ovadia Yosef, the former Sephardic chief rabbi, became the leader of this political movement. And at one point, for two elections in the 2000s, they got 11 seats. So they were at one point the third largest party in the Knesset.